Welcome to Not My Generation, the political podcast that looks at news, events, and political happenings locally, nationally, and around the world through a generational lens. I am Professor James Davenport. This is my colleague, Dr. Emily Stacey, and we are going to be talking some Native American and state government relations and a huge Supreme Court case that happened about 2 years ago now. And its impact on Oklahoma, right? So we're talking about the McGirt versus Oklahoma decision.
Yes, sir.
And you want to wrap us in here, or do you want me to go with this?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
Right. So what we're really trying to do this week is tease you, because we at Rose State College in the political science faculty have put together a great debate panel that will be on Thursday, September 30th, here at Rose State College at 11 a.m. That brings in quite a few heavy hitters and tribal voices to discuss this McGirt case. So as Professor Davenport set up, this was a massive Supreme Court decision that was laid down in July of 2020. And in this 5-4 decision, so a very split court on this, it ruled specifically, McGirt rules, that the Muskogee Nation remains an Indian reservation, or Indian country reservation, I should say, as Congress never fully de-established it. So going further, right? That's the just
right.
Facts, right? But going further, the decision was based or connected to a criminal case that occurred on a reservation, right? And so again, we are concerned, or the concern is that now the McGirt decision means that criminal cases that involve Native Americans may go through the federal system or tribal systems, not state prosecutors. So again, you've got advocates who are thrilled that it's affirming tribal sovereignty, basically, right?
Sure, right.
But then of course you have the folks who are very concerned, right? That it may allow for those criminal defendant or those criminals and their cases to be reviewed, or maybe just vacated, sentences vacated, etc. So again, it's a pretty widespread decision, and obviously not just for Oklahoma, although of course we were named in the case. This is much wider, right? In terms of Native American and tribal sovereignty. And again, the ruling reestablishes their sovereignty, and that applies to all jurisdictions. And so you've got obviously our state pretty concerned, because if you look at the map, you've got about a good half, almost even more so.
Right.
If you put all of the reservations together, half of your state is Native American territory based on this decision. And so that also means that the land, the resources underneath that land are also not state property. Right. Our
at least that is very much the concern, right?
Right.
So the geographical boundaries of the Creek Nation was established in a couple of treaties in the 1800s, and it was promised in those treaties that it would never be, taken away from them, right? And the court acknowledged that yes, number one, there's this treaty or these couple of treaties that did this, and in order for that to not hold any longer, Congress has to actually pass a law saying we're changing this, right? Which never occurred, right? And so what that means is, if I understand it correctly, if a non-tribal citizen commits a crime against a tribal citizen on tribal lands, they would be tried in a federal court or a tribal court.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
If a tribal citizen commits a crime on tribal lands, regardless of whether it's against another Native American or someone else, that would also be tried in those courts.
Exactly.
And so the McGirt case, what happened here was he had been tried in state court for several serious offenses, found guilty, and had appealed and said the state of Oklahoma was not empowered to conduct a trial in my case, right? This should have been occurred in federal court. And there's another piece of legislation called the Major Crimes Act that defines certain types of crimes which will absolutely be tried in federal courts in this kind of situation. And the case made it through the courts, and as we mentioned earlier, the Supreme Court said that's right, that this person should have been tried. And so now there's concern that they might start reviewing these prior convictions
Yes.
and having to have new trials in federal courts. And how much of a backlog is that going to put on the federal courts in Oklahoma, at least, due to this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the reports that came out over the summer via the Oklahoman is the FBI is anticipating around 7,500 cases in Oklahoma because of this ruling itself. So a huge caseload, a huge amount of resources are going to be spent based on this decision. Right. The interesting part, I think, right, we'll get back to the money of it all. But I think the more salacious part is the opposition to the Supreme Court decision by your sitting governor, who also is a Native American, right, or claims tribal affiliation, right? So this has, I think, been a continuation of Kevin Stitt's sort of
ongoing.
Yeah, that
ongoing feud with the tribes.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, and I think that this one is going to be the one that may cost him his reelection. You really can't do much in Oklahoma without the tribal support in terms of elections. You can, but you better have some good fundraising, big oil. I mean, you better have the rest of the fundraising sectors in Oklahoma if you are anti-tribe or do not have the tribal support that you need. So the latest of Stitt's oppositional moves, he is now suing the Department of Interior, and it's ironic, right? Maybe. Right. That the U.S. Department of Interior is now being headed. The secretary is the first Native American woman to actually head the U.S. Department of Interior, and so it is kind of a double whammy of wow. So he is.
The imagery isn't great.
It's really the PR is not super. So, and I quote, Stitt is suing for, and again quote, unlawfully attempting to strip Oklahoma of its jurisdiction to regulate surface coal mining and reclamation operations. So,
all right. So this is going to what you were saying. We're really, the way that the ruling was worded, right? It left open the door to this impacting much more than just criminal trials. Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I think when it comes down to it, the state, that's what the state is much. If I'm the state, and I'm told, look, you're not going to have to prosecute all these trials anymore. Your state resources aren't going to have to go to that because the feds.
Yeah.
All right.
Right.
And if they don't do a good job of it, then that's on them, right? But what's really here is the mineral rights and access to oil and other important minerals and such. That is the state going to have access to that, or the tribes now, and where do the revenues? Who gets to tax these areas, and how do they tax that? So this could be much more broad, much more impactful than just who's going to try people for committing crimes.
Exactly, and so that's really been the criminality of it has been the guise of the opposition. It's really been about who owns these resources, who's going to profit from these resources.
And I'm just going to say, the logic of the court's decision seems to imply those Native American tribes will own that.
That's right.
This is on their land, and there's nothing to my knowledge in American law that says, well, when you get down far enough in the land, you no longer have. To my knowledge, that goes all the way, right?
So, you got airspace, you got land, right?
And so it has some important ramifications, and the governor is very unhappy with. Especially the Biden administration's, decision on how this should apply in these other areas.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so kind of like we talked about just a minute ago, the jurisdiction is not just Oklahoma, and that's what Governor Stitt is trying to claim by suing. And the interesting part, the Oklahoma Department of Mines as well as the Oklahoma Conservation Commission have partnered with Stitt in this lawsuit. So kind of interesting bedfellows there, right? So we know that this is about the resources. But again, he's arguing that the decision does not apply outside of a limited context of criminal jurisdiction, which I think is kind of questionable at this point.
I think, so I'm trying to remember, and I did not have a chance to reread the opinion right before we came in, but I'm trying to remember if the court said something in their opinion that implied that or stated that explicitly that hey, we're just making a decision on this area. But even if they did say that, it would not be out of the realm of possibility that another case comes up and the court says, well, this was our logic here, and it still holds here, right? And so I think that's kind of the problem that the state administration has, is that the logic of that ruling is not going to be limited to just criminal proceedings, and
not just that one reservation or Native American nation, right? And so that we'll see. So this occurred. They filed the suit in July. We will see. You've got Native American representatives like Tom Cole, who have spoken out against Kevin Stitt filing the suit and his very public and vocal opposition to it. Obviously Tom Cole is a Republican, a fellow Republican like Stitt, but he really wants the state of Oklahoma to work with the tribes to figure out what this means for all of us in our future of the state. But that does not seem to be the position of the governor's office at this time. In fact, he tweeted out something similar yesterday, which of course made me excited because we're obviously having this debate next week, right? So it's nice and timely. But he did again tweet out yesterday, or his people tweeted from his account about another criminal case that came out, or I'm sorry, that occurred on native land, and kind of pontificating about the whether or not this person was going to get let off because of the McGirt case or decision, right?
And I think when you take that kind of situation, and listen, anytime someone's charged with an egregious crime, and then they get their case, they're going to have a retrial or something like that. People get really upset, right? But there's a reason this process is important, right? I mean, it's like in the 70s and 80s when the courts were really clamping down on violations of the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments, and cases were getting recall or convictions overturned and such. Well, listen, that's kind of important that we follow the right process. And I think some of the responses to Stitt's tweet were basically along those lines. Well, if the state of Oklahoma hadn't tried to exceed its authority, we wouldn't be in this situation.
The Cherokee Nation was very quick on their retweets there.
So you've got this, and this goes into all sorts of jurisdictional things. But the bottom line is the tribes in Oklahoma, and the tribes in Oklahoma are often, in many cases, in different situations than tribes in other countries, states. I mean, agree. First of all, the tribes here in Oklahoma were not planted on reservations as we understand them. They were granted territories through these treaties. But they weren't enforced like other reservations that were designated as such in some of these other states. And when the state of Oklahoma was formed and they started doing this and prosecuting, they just kind of started ignoring some of this stuff. And I don't know, at the time, there was a period of time where the Native American tribes' ability to self-govern was very hampered. And so to what extent they could even have pushed back against that may or may not have been there, right? I don't know that history as well. Hopefully we'll learn some of that next week.
That's the point.
But the bottom line is the state of Oklahoma starts prosecuting these crimes that occurred in these territories that were given to the Native American tribes, and now the court has said you can't do that anymore. And I think it's really going to restructure the nature of the relationship between the state of Oklahoma and these tribes, especially when you start getting into who owns the natural resources in these areas, right? And taxing jurisdiction.
That'll be very interesting. So back to the FBI, right? So I told you 7,500 cases they are estimating related to, or having to investigate related to the McGirt decision. So the House Appropriations Committee on July 15th approved $70 million in additional funding to the U.S. Justice Department specifically for their increased caseload due to McGirt, as well as a separate $10 million for the Bureau of Indian Affairs for McGirt related expenses.
So they realize
Yeah.
the added responsibility
Oh, yeah.
that's going to be
This
placed
is
on the federal
massive.
government
Yeah.
to do this, and wanted to fund the ability to
Absolutely.
carry out these responsibilities.
Yeah, very interesting stuff. So kind of to wrap this up just a little bit, the point of this forum, right, this panel we're having, if you, dear audience, were not aware, Governor Stitt, put together a forum on July 14th in Tulsa, and he invited some folks, different attorneys, state attorneys, et cetera, district attorneys, state attorneys, et cetera, to discuss the implications of the McGirt case, what it means in legalese. Unfortunately, that event only lasted about 20 minutes.
It didn't go real well.
It did not go well at all. There were complaints by Native American citizens who showed up to this forum that there were no Native voices being represented on the panel itself. And so what we're doing is trying to make sure that our debate panel is balanced and fair, right? So we have Native American journalists coming in from the Native American Journalists Association. We have General Counsel for the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes being represented. One of our history professors who is the director of our Native American Studies program,
right.
A local Oklahoma City attorney. So we have some pretty heavy hitters, but also tribal representation,
right.
and getting that voice out there into the media or into the world is really important, especially because we have so many Indigenous and Native students on campus.
Exactly.
It's really critical for us all, really, as Oklahoma citizens, to understand what this means to us and how we will be affected. Right? We all use energy, we all use resources,
exactly.
right? So
exactly.
it'll be interesting to see how this pans out.
The other thing about that July forum that the governor did, there was all sorts of controversy over.
Yes.
Did he invite tribal representatives?
Yeah.
Did he not? Both sides saying yes
Yeah.
or no, and so it was, quite frankly, not well put together.
It wasn't.
And,
Yeah, I agree.
And there was accusations made by some of the tribal organizations that this was just a dog and pony show to support the governor's position.
Right.
Could have been, could have not been,
Right.
but by and large, it certainly didn't go the way the governor had planned it to go.
Right. You want those things to be informative. You want them
Right.
to be an intellectual conversation, to have discourse with the community. And that's what we're doing. That is what next Thursday will be at Rose State College.
The whole purpose, right?
Absolutely.
And it's not to promote necessarily one perspective over another, but to give both sides an opportunity to share their perspectives and to let you, the students and community members, decide what you think about these issues and how they should be handled, right?
Perfect.
Awesome. All right. Now, tell us again, when is this going to take place?
So it is next Thursday, September 30th. It will be at 11 a.m. in the brand new Rose State College Student Union in the ballroom upstairs, second floor. You'll find the ballroom. There's only one way to go. It'll be great. It'll be a great debate. We're very excited to have faculty, stakeholders, parts of the community, etc., coming in for this. So we hope that you will join us as well. There's an open invitation.
Fantastic. Well, that wraps up for today. We hope to see you on Thursday next week at our Great Debates panel. And if you have any questions or suggestions or ideas, comments, compliments, criticisms, you can reach us at
nowmygeneration@raider.rose.edu.
We will see you next time.